natin ma-identify kung nasaan yung transmission, and we could not difficult to advocating to consider this as a part of the kasi po kung imported po yung cases, obtain po yun, not going to warrant the closure of the border, especially if that country, the imported case is identified or detected, very strong public health interventions. Kung cluster po naman, contact tracing and public health interventions to do that, then we could still contain that transmission within that cluster. So from that perspective, pag maganda po yung containment measures, we know where the virus is transmitting, we could control. But that is not enough. The second part of it would be to prepare our national systems as well to identify or detect and also ensure public health measures such as isolation and quarantine. So these are the key aspects why we are saying that risk assessment would need to be undertaken from the area of departure to know the level of transmission, as well as in the area of destination of the individual.
Thank you very much, Dr. Escalante, for that very comprehensive po, no, na definition nyo ng levels of transmission. Maybe we'd like to hear from our tag po regarding the recommendation, yung two-pronged recommendation that will do stricter quarantine protocols for all incoming travelers for those areas or countries with reported new variant from UK, and then yun ngang wait for the local transmission or community level transmission. Can we have Dr. Ana, and then Dr. Isa, and then Dr. Edsel? Dr. Ana? Or maybe Dr. Edsel first?
Okay. Yeah, actually yung recommendation na yun is really, again, wala pa namang ebidensya na nandito sa atin. So we want to keep it out as much as possible. Pero katulad na nga na napahayag dati, ang COVID kumakalat talaga kahit anong gawin mo eh. So kahit papano, gusto mo talagang at least slow down para makapag-prepare tayo kung sakali man makarating yan dito. At yung level of risk, yun nga yung tinatawag na parang i-risk assessment natin. Siyempre, mas mataas ang risk kung yung tao nanggaling sa UK versus dun sa taong nanggaling sa isa places na hindi pa na-describe yung variant na yon. At actually, important in distinction yung sa tinatawag na community transmission. Kasi pag sinabi mong community transmission, kalat na talaga sa community. Pero yung mga countries, like for instance Singapore, na napaka-stringent nung kanilang screening, na-detect nila agad doon pa lang sa border. So actually, as long as wala doon sa community, na-control nila yung pagpasok nung variant na yon sa kanilang bansa. Kaya hindi naman siguro kinakailangan pang yung sobrang i-lockdown natin. Kasi it looks like naman that they are doing their part. Sila rin nagre-restrict ng entry sa UK. So again, as WHO has mentioned, of course, there's a lot of primacy for health, pero may consequences rin itong kung magsasarado tayo ng ubo ng stricto. And what we are trying to do is multiple layers po talaga, and we have to justify the multiple layers with constant risk assessment. Pwede naman po talaga magbago, but it's very important to understand that yung ating minimum health standards really work as long as we use them and we strictly comply with what is being asked of us.
Thank you po. Dr. Ana? Or I'll have Dr. Isa first. Dr. Isa. Sige po, balikan na lang po natin ang
Laura.
Ay, yes.
Laura, sorry. I'm
yes.
back already. Medyo na lang yung signal. So I just like to emphasize what Edsel has already shared regarding the transmission levels. Also the information shared by Dr. Sok. I think the goal is actually to try to strike a balance between making sure that we are addressing the concern about transmission into our country versus undue impact that travel restrictions might pose. So siguro yung scenario na ito is fairly similar to what we encountered at the start nung dinidesisyonan yung travel restrictions from Wuhan or other countries kasi nga alam natin na kumakalat na yung sakit doon. So at that time, the decision was for an early travel restriction, which was a very beneficial move for our country. And in the same way, no, ngayon dahil kino-contextualize natin yung pagkalat ng sakit, also anticipating na meron tayong post-holiday surge, kaya minabuti din ng IATF na for the meantime, para hindi na madagdagan yung potential na lalo pang dumami at kumalat ang sakit, na magkaroon muna ng travel restrictions sa ngayon. Thank you.
Thank you po, Dr. Ana. Dr. Isa? Okay po. So, if balikan na lang po natin si Dr. Isa, but there's a interesting question here from Ms. Aiko Miguel. So, anybody from our experts can answer. So, the question is, with the existence of the new variant, would this affect the development of COVID-19 vaccines? How will this affect the immunity of those already vaccinated against COVID-19 in other countries? Dr. Edsel, you want to start po?
Okay, sige. Actually, wala pa tayong alam sa ngayon kung if this affects it. But pinag-aaralan naman, based on the number of mutations, most likely hindi naman. At yung makikita mo dyan pag naging resistant yung isang virus dun sa vaccine, hindi naman yan biglang zero eh. Makikita mo from 95 sa yung sa Pfizer, magiging 85, magiging 70. So gradual process yan. So may time tayong parang pag-aralan. Pero ang mangyayari naman dyan is if we have those surveillance systems in place, we can anticipate that and we can tweak the vaccines. For instance, di ba yung pneumonia vaccine, merong 13 strains na kasama or 23 strains. Yung sa human papilloma virus, merong 9-valent, may mga ganun. So we can adjust the vaccines. But the most important thing is we have to have the means to detect na kung nagiging resistant na siya or na e-escape na niya yung vaccine. So this is a continuing process. Science has a way of dealing with this. But the most important thing is, number one, we keep the number of infections low kasi the more infections you have, the more opportunities for the virus to mutate. At pangalawa is dapat nakabantay talaga tayo. Kasi pag oras na ma-detect natin na mukhang hindi na ganun kaganda yung vaccine, at least maayos natin, matitweak natin yung vaccine formulations para they can retain the same kind of activity. So the scientists are on the case.
Thank you, Dr. Edsel. Dr. Ana?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we could now po.
Sorry. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Dr. Edsel mentioned about keeping the infection rates down. Kasi minsan maiisip natin, ano ba naman ang pakialam natin dyan sa nangyayari sa UK? Di ba napakalayo naman yan? Di naman siguro nasa same region of the world. Pero actually, yung pagtuklas nila na meron silang variant is very relevant kasi unang-una ipinapakita na meron silang surveillance system para matukoy kung ano na yung nangyayari sa virus, lalo na kung nagkakaroon sila ng clustering of cases. So, ganun talaga ang behavior ng virus, any virus, no? Habang kumakalat siya sa isang population, nangingibabaw yung mga mas matitibay, mas magagaling kumalat, mas magagaling manghawa, and sila yung nagiging dominant strain within the population. So kung nangyari yan sa UK, pwede rin yang mangyari sa atin. Actually, di na nga natin kailangan pa mag-antay ng importation. Pwedeng-pwedeng dahil kumakalat ang sakit dito sa atin, meron din tayong sarili nating variant. Now, ang gusto nga natin is a reminder to everybody na pairalin pa rin yung minimum public health standards kasi sa ganung paraan, makokontrol natin yung pagkalat ng sakit and at the same time, makokontrol natin yung pagsibol ng mga bagong variant na maaring mas maging matindi ang epekto, mas mabilis na kumalat, mas maging matinding sanhi ng sakit.
Maraming salamat po. Dr. Isa.
Yep. Sorry, I was not able to catch earlier. The question on transmission ba yun?
Question on transmission po, and then Aiko Miguel is asking yung effect po nito sa vaccination efforts po natin.
Sige. First, yung balikan ko lang yung about the travel restriction, no? We are currently imposing, di ba, travel restriction to the countries where the new variant has been reported, and we agreed with that kasi together with the holidays now we expect the surge, and also to give us time to strengthen our surveillance system, no, which is what we've been will be working on moving forward, no. Kasi nga kailangan natin, itong virus na to ay bago, and we expect mutations to occur, no, with this type of virus. Para yan yung flu virus din natin, na every year kailangan bago yung vaccine. Paano nalalaman kung ano ilalagay dun sa vaccine? Through surveillance. So nagsasample ng mga specimens from those who develop flu, tapos kino-contribute yon globally, and then nagpo-produce ng vaccine based on the strains, predominant strains for that year. Yun yung ilalabas na vaccine. So sa itong coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, so bago siya, ganon din yung behavior, pero hindi siya kagaya hindi pa natin alam kung ano yung magiging predominant strain ng SARS-CoV-2. Kaya kailangan natin siyang i-surveillance. So nakikita pa lang natin ngayon kung paano siya nagbe-behave. Marami ng mutations na nakita pero hindi lahat yon significant, no? So base sa ginagawa rin ng Genome Center. So minomonitor din yung ating mga strains. Tapos globally din, so pagtutulungan kasi ang bawat bansa para malaman eventually ano ba magiging behavior ng virus na to, ano yung magiging predominant strain, anong vaccine ang magiging effective. Kaya ng sinabi ni Dr. Salvano, we do not know yet, no? So ongoing ang studies, and we do not think that hindi magiging effective sa ngayon yung ginagamit na vaccine, but we will have to monitor actively. Surveillance, yan yung kailangan ng surveillance. So lahat ng mga binigyan ng bakuna, minomonitor yan. Kung magkakaroon ba sila ng sakit, at kung magkasakit sila, anong magiging klaseng sakit, kung mild, moderate, severe. So lahat yan nag-e-evolve sa ngayon. So hindi pa natin masasabi right then and there na hindi na efektibo yung vaccine. Hindi pa. Hindi natin dapat sabihin na gano'n. Hindi gano'n ang pag-interpret. So kailangan ng pag-aaral. Pag-aaral ang kailangan. Kaya po ang surveillance sineset up natin dito rin sa ating bansa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isa. So 2 major points po doon, no? So we want to keep the infections rate low para less chances of the virus to mutate. And it is to the best interest of the countries, no, to share or keep the studies ongoing po para we will determine, no, what will be the dominant strain and know what vaccines po, no, yung kakailanganin. So maybe would like to have addendum po from Dr. Sok Escalante.
Laura, sorry. Yes, I think I have nothing more to add. Sa ngayon, hindi pa natin talaga malalaman kung yung implications ng mutant na ito has some implications into the efficacy of our vaccines. So pinag-aaralan pa yan. So I support also what Dr. Isa has said and the other experts, that it is really very important for us to control and suppress the transmission. Otherwise, we will see more of these virus mutations, and it would be more difficult maybe if these mutations are very important in terms of increasing transmission or infectivity or even the severity of the illness, then mas mahihirapan tayo to fight COVID-19.
Thank you po. Yes po, sir.
Yeah, gusto ko lang bigyan din, and I keep saying this, no? Despite the evolution of continuing, evolution of new strains, no, from this SARS-CoV-2, we're not helpless, we're not defenseless, and we always have to drill down. Kakanyunin natin lahat ito gamit ang minimum public health standards. Yun ang talagang panlaban natin dyan. So mag-iingat tayo. Yun pa rin, still fundamental. So yun ang lagi natin dapat iparating sa ating mga kababayan na may laban po tayo dito. Pero ang pag-iingat ang numero uno, at nasabi na kung bakit kinakailangan mag-ingat, ayaw mong makapasok hanggat sa maaari, ayaw mo magkaroon ng madaming kaso dahil kung mas maraming kaso, kumbaga nagiging plataforma siya para lalong magkaroon ng mutation opportunity. No? So we're trying to do everything to control, if at all possible, avoid the entry of this new variant. But at the end of the day, it's still back to basic, which is the minimum public health standards. Yung pa rin po. Yun lang. Thank you.
Laura.
Yes po, Dr. Isa.
Yeah. Can I just add also to that
Sure po.
Yung mode of transmission po ng ating virus hindi naman nagbago. Ang main driver of transmission pa rin po yung respiratory droplets, no? So pag umubo, nagsasalita ng malakas, kumakain, or you are in an enclosed space, no? Kaya ine-emphasize pa rin po natin yung minimum health standards. So air circulation, physical distancing, wearing of mask and face shield, no? So yun pa rin ang paraan para maiwasan ang sakit, no, ang COVID-19. Kahit na nag-mutate yung virus, yung mode of transmission pareho pa rin. So pareho pa rin yung mga pag-iingat na kailangan nating gawin.
Salamat po, Dr. Isa. The next question I think is mas pang kay Dr. Saloma po. No? So ang question niya ay, follow-up to ni Ms. Aiko Miguel, there are reports that this new variant is more alarming than the D614G variant po. Ano po ang difference ng virulence ng dalawa? Dr. Saloma?
Can I share my screen to everyone? Okay, so everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear po, Doktora.
Okay, so I'm sharing with you here the screen. So you remember in the early parts of June, we were able to detect the D614G mutation that seems to be predominant worldwide. Ang gusto ko lang ipaalam sa ating mga tagapakinig is itong bagong variant na sinasabi nila ng SARS-CoV-2 na sa UK, it already carries the D614G mutation, but on top of that, ito yung N501Y, which is the most interesting one, primarily because the region kung saan nag-occur itong mutation is in the region that binds to the receptor of the host, which is the ACE2 receptor. So pinapakita natin dito sa table na ito. So this is only the region of the spike protein. If you remember, yung genome size ng ating SARS-CoV-2 is about 29,000 plus, nearly 30,000. So itong spike region is about 1,200 plus. Ginawa ng Genome Center is ni-map natin kung saan ba yung distinct UK mutations. So dito sa table na ito or sa graph na ito, napapakita 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So actually ito existing na ito. So yung UK mutation actually has 17 mutations 8 of which occur in the spike region. That's why people are a little bit concerned kasi baka may mga effects sa vaccine, etc., because many of the vaccines were originally designed based on the sequence of the S region. So pinapakita rin natin dito na this is the D614G mutation that has spread worldwide. And in addition to that, the UK variant also contains N501Y, ganito, at saka yung isang medyo pinagkakainterasan ng marami itong region na ito kasi this has something to do with the immune response. So pinapakita rin natin dito na yung distinct UK mutations, tsaka yung Philippine na na-track pa lang natin, ito hindi sila nag-overlap, particularly in the N501Y. So kung makita niyo ito yung talagang distinct Ito yung variant, yung kumbaga yun ng signature region ng variant along with the other regions na 17 sa UK. So mga Philippine variants or mutations sa spike region, may nakita na rin kami. So far, hindi din natin alam kung anong implications nito, but they are found at low levels. These are rare variants. And the only reason that we were able to detect this is because when we sequenced the SARS-CoV-2 genome, we sequenced them at more than 2,000 coverage. Ibig sabihin, kahit yung isang virus, pwede siya mag-mutate internally sa isang individual at pwede mag-mutate yung isang region niyan ng nucleic acid. So we have mapped this as part of our biosurveillance effort, and we are just showing to you the spike region of the local variants we have found so far. So far, yung distinct genotype, kumbaga yung sequence of mutations doon sa UK, other than the D614G, which has already been described, hindi pa naman natin nakikita sa mga samples natin, which we did until October. Hindi po natin alam kung yung November and December samples natin meron na o wala. Kaya pag the next weeks, ito po yung ating gagawin together with our partners, NIH at saka RITM, para mapaigin natin yung ating genomic biosurveillance sa bansa.
Thank you po, Dr. Saloma. Before I ask the Director Celia to give her addendum, basahin ko na lang din po itong question ni Ms. May Bermudez. Yung D614G variant na cause ng surge last June na malakas makahawa, meron pa rin ba sa atin? Yun pa rin po ba ang kumakalat sa ngayon?
Opo. So if you notice, I'm still sharing the screen. Ito yung region na blue. Ito, na-detect pa rin natin dito sa ating sample. So, ibig sabihin, itong blue na ito, common ito, D614G, na-detect pa rin natin dito sa Pilipinas. And in fact, it's probably the dominant strain now, pero wala pa tayo nitong mga pink. No? Yung commonality lang natin with the UK variant is the region na D614G. So, sa tanong na yun, kumakalat pa rin. Essentially, that is the dominant strain in the Philippines and worldwide right now. But on top of that, the virus also acquired additional mutations.
Thank you po, Dr. Saloma. Director Celia Carlos, would you like to add po?
I agree with the observation that the D614G mutation is still persisting based on our sequence studies at RITM. But the question, I think, was referring to virulence. If the question is about virulence, in layman's term, that means harmfulness or causing more serious disease. According to reports so far from the patients studied in the UK, only transmissibility is increased, but not the virulence or the severity of the infection. So as of now, those are the findings, and we will need to await further reports from the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you po, Director Celia and Dr. Saloma. So,
Laura.
Yes, sir. You'd like to
Ganun
add
din yan, yung nagkaroon tayo ng mutation to D614G. That was also a much faster transmissibility. No? But the virulence mukhang neutral. Hindi siya nagbago. So hopefully that trend will continue. But it still, of course, warrants carefulness on our part, no? That this thing doesn't enter the country as much as possible, Although some people are saying it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when. But at least knowing what we know now, we have the lead time to do all the things that our experts have recommended in yesterday's presentation to the president. So it's really just, to me, all the 5 strategic pillars of our pandemic response will need to be tweaked a bit more. Kailangan palakasin pa rin natin itong 5 aspeto ng ating tugon sa pandemic COVID-19. No? So yung prevention, early detection, isolation, treatment, etc., reintegration. So I don't want to go into the subcomponents of each of these pillars. No? But the systems are in place, the mechanisms are in place, the policies are in place. So kailangan lang i-review natin vis-a-vis this evolving situation of a possible new UK variant that may enter the country anytime soon. We don't know when, we don't know. Thank you.
Laura, can I add something?
Yes, go ahead po, Dr.
Yeah, so I think what we really should keep in mind is, this is not the first time we're facing something like this. And of course, yung nangyari nga nung June, nag-search po talaga tayo. Tapos ngayon, ito may bagong variant na naman. Pero we've learned a lot of lessons from yung nangyari sa June. So isa dun sa gagawin natin ngayon is really yung papaigtingin pa natin yung ating quarantine. And now we're also doing a lot of genomic surveillance. Para on the flip side, hindi lahat ng mutations are ganito na nagiging mas transmissible. In fact, most of the mutations are either neutral, walang ginagawa sa virus, or in fact, in some cases, nagiging less virulent. We think that yung mga nagkukos ng colds na coronaviruses, ganito siya dati, tapos over time, naging less virulent na siya. And in fact, merong na-report na isang variant sa Singapore na parang ganun nga yung nangyari sa SARS-CoV-2 dito sa COVID-19. Yung mga nakitaan nila nung variant na yon, wala sa kanilang nagkaroon ng severe disease. Unfortunately, ang nangyari is because it was harmful to the virus, nawala siya eventually. Pero this is part of the process of the virus as it evolves into the human species. And actually, ang endpoint talaga niyan usually is pag naka-adapt siya sa humans, nagiging less virulent siya. Pero ayaw natin gawin yon na tuloy-tuloy kasi marami talagang mamamatay while we're waiting. So the best way forward talaga is with the vaccine, and kailangan talaga tayo maging vigilant for these kinds of mutations.
Thank you po, Dr. Edsel. Maybe to Dr. Edsel or any of our experts po, no, pwede pong pakiliwanag in a more pangmasa na manner what is mutation and the process of genome sequencing. Is mutation good or bad, and how important is genome sequencing in studying the virus? May ilan po kasing nag-aakala na may bagong virus na kumakalat because of these developments sa COVID-19. Thank you.
So Laura, let me answer the question first.
Go ahead po.
Oo, so sinasabi na marami nating experts at saka sa ating epidemiologists na ang mutation sa virus is part of its evolution. So, for example, this coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is an RNA virus. So, from RNA to DNA to RNA to protein, yun yung kanyang root. So, during the time of copying or replication, may error siya, no? So, nagkaka-error siya, nag-mutate siya. But it is also very, very important for everyone to know na just because may mga base changes dyan sa virus na yan, it doesn't mean na palagi siyang deleterious or harmful. Pwede namang ang mutation neutral. Wala lang. No? Neutral. In fact, itong SARS-CoV-2 virus na ito, because it is the most closely watched virus in the world with so many people doing the sequencing, more than 12,000 mutations have already been detected sa virus na ito. So it's not new na may mutation. It's normal in the course of the virus evolution, and it's in copying and replication na magkakaroon siya ng mutation. Kung baga nagkaka-error yung mga letra ng RNA or DNA. Pero as sinasabi natin, hindi naman palaging bad yun, no? Pwede naman na ang mutation bad sa virus, namamatay siya, pwede rin yun. In the same manner na pwede rin mag-mutate yung virus na parang wala lang nangyari. We call that neutral. Pwede rin na yung virus magiging better adapted to the human host. So, pwede siyang tumagal ng tumagal. So, technically, pag ang isang virus very virulent, against sa kanya yun. Kung mamamatay ang host niya, di mamamatay din siya. So it will be ending its existence. So hindi niya gusto yon. So in general, for the virus to stay longer, dapat mild lang yung kanyang mutations. Tapos bakit kailangan natin ng gene sequencing? Di ba everybody nag-RT-PCR tayo? And the RT-PCR tests na license sa Pilipinas, iba-iba po yung targets. Merong S region, may N, may kung ano-ano. So tinitingnan din natin kung yung mga primers na ginamit doon sa sequencing na yon, nagwo-work pa o hindi. So that is very, very important. And it is also very possible na locally, sinasabi kanina ni Dr. Ana, na locally, pwede talagang mag-mutate itong virus na ito. And we have to watch out particularly yung mga immunocompromised patients natin. So kailangan nating genomic biosurveillance kasi hindi natin malalaman yung changes sa nucleic acids kung hindi tayo mag-sequence. No? And we have to sequence deeply. Kailangan malalim, kumbaga, yung isang genome na yan, isi-sequence natin 2,000 times para makita natin yung mga minute changes. Okay, yan lang po.
Thank you, Dr. Saloma. Dr. Ana or any from our tag would like to give an addendum po. Or Director Celia.
Ako, konti lang. Siguro to make it simpler, let me just say that viruses are living organisms. Buhay po sila. So, they multiply. Di ba po? Pag nag-multiply po ang isang living organism, meron po minsan changes na nangyayari in a normal rate. So in a normal rate, may changes which the scientists call mutations. And these mutations are generally for the good of the virus. So it's a dictum in science na survival of the fittest. So the virus aims to make itself propagate or sustain its lifespan. So pag naka-encounter po siya ng adverse environment, nag-change po siya, and that is scientifically called mutation. So the changes or mutations can occur through alterations in its structure. Para simple na lang structure, nucleic acids po yun or the other structural components, yung mga bases na sinabi ni Dr. Saloma. So pwede pong mag-delete, may matanggal, may mapalitan, substitute, yung mga ganong style ng changes. And unfortunately, itong strain na to na from UK had many changes. They counted at 17. And it's really much more than the normal rate kasi ang normal rate is 2 substitutions per genome per month. But this rate, the number of mutations of this virus occurred at a much faster pace and at a bigger magnitude, and that is sending people to become worried. You know? And it had been observed to affect some important aspects for the virus to adapt better in infecting people. For example, one of the mutations will cause better affinity to the receptor in humans. So mas madaling kumapit po yung virus sa receptor niya sa humans. So that means greater infectivity. Kaya what we see as a consequence is increased transmissibility. Okay? There is also one mutation noted where there was a deletion in the spike protein. So that's being interpreted as a possible, hindi naman sure, possible effect on the antibody response of the host. Kunwari, pwede na siyang vaccinated or immune na siya, pero because of this alteration, the virus is able to survive even in a previously infected patient with antibodies or a previously vaccinated patient with antibodies. So that's the general simplified explanation for the mutation. Now sa sequencing, mas komplikado po ito kaysa sa PCR. Sa sequencing po kasi, tinitingnan yung mga quality and the numbers of the building blocks ng virus in layman's term. Kung ano po ang mga nagiging numbers and qualities of those building blocks, kung may changes po doon. So parang PCR, i-inactivate mo rin, i-extract mo rin yung nucleic acid, kanya lang may additional step, yung library prep at saka yung sequencing. Tinitingnan mo ngayon kung nagbago yung mga building blocks na yon. And then, i-compare mo yon sa mga previously sequenced genetic material. Kasi worldwide, like sa UK, nag-sequence sila and many other countries do sequencing. So there's an international database where people deposit the results of their sequences. And people, therefore, scientists can compare whether sequences are changing and where these are changing and what part have been changing. Because of these advances in science and sharing of information, the UK government now was able to identify that their sequences have changed from the usual. And people around the world who are logged into that database are able to realize that, oh yes, we agree that that is a significant finding. And that will keep everyone alert of these possible changes, which may be more deleterious for the health of people, you know. So in simple terms, that's the meaning of sequencing. Thank you.
Thank you po, Director Carlos. Anyone from Martag would like to add or okay na po?
Laura, I want to add.
Go ahead po.
Yeah, let's make it simple. Kasi yung sequencing, molecular biology yan, tinitingnan natin yung DNA. Siguro the best analogy is isipin mo nagbibigay ka ng IQ test sa mga estudyante. Okay? Mahahanap mo kung sino yung matalino, sino yung kailangan ng tulong, sino yung normal lang. So yung sequencing, parang yung mga virus na nakikita natin, parang binibigyan natin sila ng test kung sino yung mas delikado, sino yung mas nakakahawa, parang ganon. And the way we do that is with sequencing. Kasi yung genetic code, may mga markers yan. Makikita mo na mas delikado itong ganitong klaseng virus. Ito naman, baliwala yun. So parang fingerprinting rin. Genetic fingerprinting is another term for sequencing actually. Para mas matutukoy natin kung sino yung masamang tao, sino yung hindi masamang tao. Tapos once meron na tayo ng fingerprint na yon, makikita natin kung merong mga ganong klase around, di ba? So I think that tools po ito, yung genetic sequencing, para malaman natin kung nagbabago yung anyo ng virus at kung may kailangang ikabahala. At dahil alam na natin kung may picture ka na, may isang ex-con or ganun, parang alam mo na kung anong itsura niya. At alam mo pa rin kung anong ibang hahanapin. Marami bang namatay na tao? Dumadami ba masyado yung cases over time na over the usual? So these are all just tools. Just to make it simple kasi para hindi na natin kailangan i-review yung central dogma, yung molecular biology. Genomic sequencing is a tool that will help us find viruses that are behaving differently and can pose problems, make people sicker or infect more people or become vaccine tolerant. So that's really the role of genomic sequencing here para at least alam natin, meron tayong laban, meron tayong advanced warning para hindi na mangyari kasi yung dati medyo nakapasok talaga yung B614G. Hopefully hindi na yun mangyayari yung search na ganun ngayon kasi may advanced info na tayo.
Thank you po, Dr. Edsel. So, parang to summarize lang po, what we're saying is mutations can either be good or bad. And genomic sequencing is a tool to really identify, para po parang ma-judge natin yung different variants or strains kung sila ba ay mas infectious or not, no? And then provide the necessary measure. So, ganun po. I guess along that lines, when you talk of biosurveillance and monitoring, I'd like to ask this question po, no? Dr. Montoya suggested last night that there should also be a separate genome sequencing for local samples to determine possible mutations in the Philippines. Apart from the current mutations, how important is it to find out new possible variants here? Maybe I'd pose the question to Dr. Saloma, Director Celia Carlos, and maybe to Secretary Duque to discuss kung ano po ba yung mga plano din ng gobyerno to strengthen our bio or genomic surveillance mechanisms. So Director Carlos first and then Dr. Saloma.
Yes, of course, if we are watchful of the sequences that have been emerging in other countries, we should also be watchful of the sequences which are emerging in our own country, because we never can tell what type of changes or mutations can happen even within among our own isolates, and whether these changes will cause more severe illness or will not be important at all. So it should be the same practice worldwide and for every country to find out if other countries are are reporting mutant strains of their own samples, and of course for our own country to find out whether our own isolates we are seeing mutations among our own isolates, which I think is even more important because that will in fact affect our own people, and we need to intervene, assess first how important the mutations are so we can intervene properly. Thank you.
Dr. Saloma.
So, Laura, yung pinakikita ko kanina sa inyo sa screen, yung ni-share screen ko kanina, actually, itong mga regions na hindi pink, local isolates natin itong mga variants or mga mutations na nakita na natin. So we use all the sequences available na diniposit ng Philippine Genome Center, RITM, at saka ng Viluna Medical Center, including those which we have not shared yet to the community, so our internal sequences. At ni-map na namin kung ano yung mga mutations locally. Itong mga orange na ito at yung mga blue na ito, these were found in our local isolates. So, yung sinasabi ni Dr. Jimmy na we have to track our mutations, this is an effort. So, pinapakita lang namin S region lang, but actually tracking the entire virus genome, kumbaga yung buong sequence niya. No? So, maya-maya kung madagdagan pa ito, dadagdagan pa natin kung ano yung makikita natin at kino-compare natin kung yung mga sequences na yun nakikita na ba sa ibang bansa, nakikita na ba sa atin, or in combination, ganitong mga sequences, meron ba tayo sa atin? So kailangan talaga mag-genomic biosurveillance tayo. And pinapaigi pa natin together with the Department of Health and the Epidemiology Bureau going forward na gagawa talaga tayo ng pangbaga targeted biosurveillance para dito and also for future infections and cluster of infections. Yan lang.
Thank you. Secretary Duque, would you like to add po ano pong mga measures natin upang paigtingin ng bio or genomic surveillance natin?
Yeah, we support all the recommendations of our experts. At gaya ng nabanggit ko, kailangan din natin talagang palakasin ang kapasidad for bio or genomic surveillance, and then institutionalize this as a comprehensive system kasama doon sa current ILI and SARI surveillance natin, at mabigyan ng sapat na kapasidad ang mga national sub-laboratories gaya ng RITM para makapagsagawa nga nitong mga tinatawag na biobanking o yung mga pagkolekta, pag-imbak ng mga samples para sa kakailanganin surveillance. At ito ay napaka-importante sa tingin ko in terms of monitoring vaccine effectiveness. So by and large, this will warrant the unequivocal support of the national government. But of course, I would like to ask our experts, the 3 laboratories with the capacity to do such biosurveillance, to come up with a consolidated budgetary requirement, so that we can already include this. Because madali magsalita pero kung walang pondo, mahirapan tayo, puro salita lang tayo. So gusto ko lang malaman magkano yung pangkalahatan budget support na kinakailangan, and we have to already include this in the GAA. So ilan po, maraming salamat.
Thank you, sir. On that note, no, meron lang, sir, pending question dito. It's not entirely related, but President Duterte discloses, I know you've been answering questions na po dun sa mga nagpapabakuna ahead of our regulatory approval, no? But there has been a disclosure daw po that some have been vaccinated in the Philippines ng Sinopharm. What would be your reaction on this, sir?
Well, hindi po ako makapagsalita ng kompleto patungkol dito dahil yun lang din po yung narinig nyo ang narinig ko. So I will have to defer to the President the basis for his statement. But as of now, I really can't say. Kung ano lang yung narinig nyo, yun din yung narinig ko.
Thank you, sir.
Laura, can I comment on that?
Yes, Dr. Edsel, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's to take an unapproved, unregulated vaccine is very, very dangerous. Unang-una, hindi natin alam kung vaccine talaga yung itinuturok sa'yo. Kasi if people are willing to break the law to give something like that, then they're not going to hesitate to give you water or something more harmful. So buyer beware talaga yan. The second is, yung hindi pa natin alam, so far the only 2 vaccines that we have final clinical data for are the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. And those need very cold storage. So kahit may nakakuha man ng Pfizer na ituturok sa inyo, pag hindi nila yan finreach na mabuti, hindi rin yan gagana. Third is, kung may fly-by-night operation dyan, alam naman natin karamihan ng bakuna, 2 doses, di ba? Baka binigay sa inyo yung isa, kinuha yung pera nyo, tapos mawawala na. So hindi natin alam kung makukuha niyo pa yung second dose, kung tunay nga yun. And then finally, the other issue here is, paano kung later on, say if you have a bad reaction, you don't even know kung ano yung binigay sa'yo eh. So we wouldn't know what to treat you with. So there's really a lot of danger in doing those kinds of things. More than losing money, you could lose your life. And when the vaccines do get here, and we don't know what you got, it might the right vaccines, the correct vaccines, might not even work kasi they're not going to mix with whatever it is they gave you. Maybe they gave you the wrong dose or hindi na siya mabisa dahil hindi na sunod yung cold chain. So I urge everyone to stay away from those kasi you are literally putting your life at risk if you take unregulated medicines, especially COVID vaccines.
Laura?
Yes, Dr. Escalante.
Yes, I would just like to take this opportunity rin para magdagdag doon po sa sinabi ni Dr. Edsel kung gaano po ka-importante yung tinatawag natin na regulations ng vaccine. Although naririnig po natin na marami na nga pong ginagawa na vaccines, in fact, ang dami pong candidate na vaccines globally. From the monitoring of WHO, there are around 52 vaccines na pinag-aaralan na po sa clinical trial, that is sa tao na po pinag-aaralan, and there are around 200 more na nasa preclinical stage. So kahit po mabilis yung paggawa ng bakuna, WHO po at sa lahat ng mga bansa natin ay sinisigurado na hindi nami-miss, there is no step that is being missed in the development of the vaccine and in the regulation of the vaccine to ensure that the standards of safety and efficacy and quality are met. So while even during the very early stage of the clinical trial, there are already very stringent standards that manufacturers or developers of vaccine would have to follow. So bago po tayo nagsimula ng research and development, nag-convene na po ng global expert to look at what do we call as the target product profile. Ito yung mga ideal na characteristics or attribute ng vaccines na kailangan pong i-meet ng bakuna. Pag na-meet po yung mga attributes na yon, that those profile, then it can already be registered to the national regulatory authorities. So yung sinasabi po ni Dr. Edsel that it's really very important to ensure that we are only going to take the vaccines in the country that passes through stringent regulatory evaluation and assessment. And on that aspect, meron po tayong dalawang parallel processes to ensure that the vaccines are safe with a level of efficacy that is needed and of good quality. Yung unang-una po, yun po yung tinatawag natin na WHO emergency use listing. Ito po ay ginagawa kung ang vaccines ay nasa clinical stage pa lang at kailangan na nating sugpuin severe disease like COVID-19. And this emergency use listing is only used in the context of public health emergency. So, ang WHO po, nag-create po ng transparent platform wherein we invited, WHO called for all the manufacturers of vaccines in the world to participate in the emergency use listing. And once that there is an expression of interest, WHO convinced experts and also stringent regulatory authorities also around the world who are willing to participate in the evaluation to go through that very rigorous assessment. Then once that is done and the candidate vaccine is qualified for emergency use listing, listed na po yan, and then the countries can use and could rely from the WHO assessment to get those vaccines to be procured in their own countries. Ang pangalawa po natin na mechanism is yung tinatawag natin na pre-qualification, and this comes later on at the very later stage. Kung na-register na po yung mga vaccine sa national regulatory authorities, WHO also convince expert again to look at the safety, quality, pati po yung pag-produce na pag-manufacture ng vaccines. So that's one layer of how the vaccine safety and quality are ensured. The second layer po is yung ating mga national regulatory authorities, for example, FDA. Kaya po yung FDA natin and the other national regulatory authorities in other countries are composed of scientists and independent experts. So they would also be able to assess the safety, quality, and efficacy of vaccines. Now, of course, meron po tayong mga countries in the region that do not have very stringent regulatory authority or kakaunti yung capacity. Yun po yung tinatawag din natin na pwede silang mag-rely or to recognize the evaluation of other stringent regulatory authorities still to ensure na yung papasok na vaccine sa bansa is of good quality and of sufficient standard and efficacy. And just to add one last minute, because I just want to take this opportunity, gusto rin po naming sabihin, ipaalam na hindi lahat ng bakuna, kahit hindi po 100% na magkakaroon ng safe na vaccine, although dumaan po yan sa very stringent process, may makikita pa rin po tayo na percentage of the population na magkakaroon ng adverse event or adverse event following immunization or adverse event of special interest. Ito po yung mga very serious na may anaphylaxis or etc. So, kailangan din po nating buuin yung safety monitoring natin ng bakuna pag naka-deploy na ito sa ating bansa. So, thank you for this opportunity to add on the regulatory aspect of the vaccines, just to inform our media colleagues on the process of how the safety, quality, and efficacy of vaccines are ensured. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you po. So I just have two questions. All the rest po include ng mga tanong niyo sa bakuna will just answer separately po, no? So I'll just go back to the topic. Yung questions po, maybe Secretary Duque can answer. Ano po yung, kailan po effective yung quarantine for other countries, no? Na minention po natin last night. Effective na po ba yung inaprubahan ni PRRD last night, sir?
Yes, that is my understanding. Effective na po yung quarantine kung saan mga lugar na natukoy na meron ng bagong variant. Ano? So, and then yung pangalawa, yung extension by another 2 weeks, yung ating travel temporary ban on travelers from UK. No? So, yan. Although of course, ngayon kasi may mga narinig na rin ako na halimbawa ang Japan daw ay nag-ban na rin ng mga travelers from countries even if they have no local transmission. Basta meron lang silang mga bansa na nakita na meron daw UK itong variant na ito. I think, I don't know if today they already banned all countries. So I don't know, the situation is evolving. No? So we'll have to be mindful of what's happening around us. And then hopefully, remember our recommendations are not cast in stone. No? It can change depending on the most recent developments. No? So with the support of our expert panel, we would seek continuing guidance from the wisdom of our expert panel and also the WHO guidance as well is crucial. So tingnan natin, no?
Thank you, sir. Yusek Verheri would like to add, are we going to issue further guidelines to this?
Yes, actually nag-uusap-usap ngayon through the Viber group yung iba't ibang ahensya na magpapatupad nitong mga rekomendasyon kagabi para makapag-issue ng mga clarificatory guidelines para maliwanag para sa lahat.
Laura, I think we have to move fast here. If we can put the guidelines today, we should do it today. Yun lang po.
Thank you po, sir. Last question before I ask na po mag-wrap up, no? So, Miss Caroline Bunkin is asking, paano po nagkaroon ng D614G sa bansa? Posible po ba kung di nakapasok ang D614G sa bansa, posible na mas konti ang ating cases? So, maybe Dr. Ana, do you want to start with this?
So the premise there, Caroline, is that these are imported variants. And this importation was the reason why it became the dominant form. No? But as for what already has been shared to us earlier, ang mutations talagang likas yan sa mga living organisms and also for viruses, no? So kahit na sabihin natin siguro, no, malamang sa hindi, importation yung pagkalat ng D614G variant dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, pwede rin namang eventually likas na lilitaw yan dun sa whatever pool we have, no? That's also a possibility. So my point lang naman is still to go back to how are we going to prevent these variants from occurring within our setting? Na babalik na naman tayo dun sa inuulit-ulit natin. We need to keep our cases low, and the way to keep our cases low will be by following the minimum public health standards. No, I think kung merong dapat na message na lumabas galing sa press con na ito will be, sige, nagkaroon ng variant na natuklasan sa UK. So ano ang maganda doon sa pagkakatuklas na yon? Unang-una, nalaman ng buong mundo na may ganitong klaseng variant at nabigyan tayong lahat ng pagkakataon na mag-ingat, na doble ingat. Pangalawa, nabigyan ng realization na napakahalaga ng surveillance. Pangatlo, na-emphasize na likas talaga sa mga virus ang magkaroon ng variation. And pang-apat, para makaiwas dun sa mga ganong klaseng variation is we need to be able to contain the cases, and this can be done through common sense and application of the minimum public health standards. Thank you.
Thank you po. So,
Laura, dagdag ko lang.
Yes, go ahead.
We're assuming that was just one introduction of D614G in the Philippines. Malamang hindi po ganon. It might have been multiple. Of course, because there are people coming back all the time, and yun nga, yung testing natin is not 100%. That is why quarantine is so important. Because if there is one thing that can prevent transmission talaga, it's quarantine. Kasi kahit mag-false negative pa yung test mo, kung naka 14 days ka na, hindi na nakakahawa yung virus sa katawan mo kahit na-miss ka pa, kahit asymptomatic ka pa. If we look at the spread of COVID in any country, sabihin natin New Zealand controlled nila ang COVID nila and yet they had 273 different introductions. Napakalaki nun. So it's really people bringing it in. Nangyayari po talaga yon, and it's nakakahawa. So, ang nangyayari dyan is, the virus will do what the virus does, but we have to do what we can do to prevent the virus from spreading. Sinasabi nga nila, 5% of the virus, 80% of transmission is because of 5% of people who are super spreaders. So, cooperative yung 95%, pero yung 5%, kaya ka ng isync And that's why super important talaga yung ating minimum health standards dahil hindi natin alam kung sino yung super spreader. So lalahatin natin yan because even if isa or dalawa lang ang makalusot, ganyan naman talaga yung nangyari kaya nagpandemya tayo, magkakalat talaga to. So the best thing to do is really yung ating minimum health standards.
Thank you po. Dr. Isa?
Dagdag ko lang na kailangan tayo magtulungan sa pag-implement nitong minimum health standards. So, bawat sektor, bawat Pilipino, kailangan alam kung paano umiwas sa sakit. So, yung ating sinasabi na pag may sakit ka, huwag ka nang lalabas, no? Or magkokonsulta para hindi ka makahawa, and then yun na, yung face mask, face shield, distancing. So yung tamang pag-implement, tapos yung quarantine din, yun yung isang kailangan pa rin natin pagtulungan na i-implement ng maayos, no, para hindi nga kumalat. Kasi yung D614G, paano siya kumalat? Na-report na to ni Dr. Saloma, no, PGC, based dun sa sequencing kung saan siya nanggaling. So nung dumating yung yung mga OFWs, Princess Diamond na mukhang doon pa medyo pareho yung sequencing So galing sa ibang bansa na nakapasok sa atin. So paano nakapasok? Kasi siyempre yung sa quarantine measures natin yon, kailangan pa rin natin siyang pag-igihin, yung pag-implement ng ating quarantine measures for any mutation or variants that is coming in. So again, pareho pa rin yung measures na kailangan nating gawin. Kailangan lang mas maganda yung pag-implement natin. So bawat isa sa atin ay may responsibilidad, no, para makontrol ang pandemya na ito.
Thank you, Dr. Isa. So just to summarize, no, we're saying that it could actually be multiple sources itong D6, itong variant na ito po, no? And then from Dr. Ana, Dr. Edsel, and Dr. Isa, it's really back to basic kung paano po natin din makokontrol ito. Before I ask Director Carlos and Dr. Saloma to provide their final message po, baka paki-incorporate na rin po, no? Ano po ba yung difference ng strain sa variant sa isolate? Director Carlos.
Let me just give some additional comments on the previous topic on how the D614G was able to enter the Philippines. Let us remember that there is no country in the world which sequences 100% of its COVID isolates. So even the wealthiest countries like the UK, they're only able to sequence 5 to 10% of all their COVID positive isolates. So given that in the Philippines, the percentage sequencing capacity is even lower. So probably the cases that caused the spread of this new strain were not detected by the isolates submitted to us for sequencing. And that caused the spreading of this strain with not too many isolates being sequenced. So the bottom line is we need to improve our capacity to sequence so that we can detect any such new mutants which may appear in the country. So what are the other questions? The strain and variant.
Yes po,
And
what's the difference daw po?
let me start with the isolate. That's the basic one. The isolate is the microorganism which grows from a sample. Diba when a patient comes in for swabbing, there is a sample collected, and then that is subjected to testing. And whatever organism that is identified from that sample is called the isolate in simple terms. Pero in short, it's in scientific terms, it's a microorganism, corobio, in other words. Yung strain, just like what we have been discussing, even if there is a so-called standard genetic structure, which was the initially sequenced COVID-19 virus, there have been some changes observed in the genetic structure of the other strains, of the other isolates, which were identified from samples collected later. So these are sort of modified structures in the subsequent isolates, from modified compared to the original structure of the COVID-19 virus identified in China. So those are maybe modifications, modified structures from the original structure. So there are such occurrences in organisms. There is a basic structure which will identify an organism as an organism. For example, there is a genetic structure associated and identified for human beings. Kaya nga we are identified as Homo sapiens. And yet we do not look the same. Your face is different from your neighbor, from the others. So that means, in simple terms, we are not identical in all the genetic structures, but we have basic genetic structures which classify us as a particular strain, as a particular organism. I hope that it is clear. So may basic structure, and then there are modifications from the basic structure, and that is usually referred to as a strain. Thank you.
Laura?
Yusek.
Yes, the media would like to be clarified. I don't know, maybe Dr. Edsel and Dr. Celia and Dr. Saloma can answer. They like to be clarified what they are supposed to use. Yeah. If it's the strain or the variant. Dr. Edsel?
Yeah. So actually, isa lang ang, strictly speaking, genetically, isa lang ang strain ng SARS-CoV-2. Kasi yung SARS-CoV, MERS-CoV, these are all strains of coronavirus. So ang strain lang natin ng SARS-CoV-2 is iisa. And then any mutations to that strain is called a variant. And then if at some point dumami talaga yung mutations na hindi na gumagana yung bakuna or iba na yung response na antibody, that's the only time masasabihin mo na may bagong strain na nag-emerge. But it's very loosely used kasi yun yung nangyayari, strain, variant. Pero strictly speaking, if you want to be correct about it, we should use the term variant because there is only one strain of SARS-CoV-2. Yun lang po.
Salamat po. If there will be no more additions po from our experts kasi 1.5 hours na po tayo sa ating Bio 101. I'd like to ask Yusek Vergere to give her closing remarks and then the secretary for the closing statement. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Actually, this is not a closing remark. No, it's the secretary. But we just like to, gusto lang po namin mag-emphasize ulit dun sa ating mga messages. Kasi kagabi po, nagkaroon tayo lahat ng confusion patungkol dun sa pag-issue ng travel ban for UK at dun sa ibang mga bansang affected ngayon. Marami po dun sa ating mga media partners nagulat na mag-i-impose lang daw po tayo ng ban kapag nagkaroon na tayo ng community transmission sa UK. Gusto lang ho namin klaruhin and we'd like to emphasize na yung restriction for UK travelers in effect na po at napagdesisyonan na ng IATF simula pa noong December 24 ang ating restriction no, na napag-usapan sa IATF. Ito po ay nairekomenda na at naaprubahan na ng ating Pangulo. Meron din po tayong nakitang report kagabi na mag-i-impose lamang daw po tayo ng restriction kapag nandito na sa bansa ang new variant. Inuulit lang po namin na mali po ito. Ang tunay po nating rekomendasyon, kino-consider po natin ang ban para sa mga areas or bansa kung saan may naulat na community transmission ng mga kaso hango sa new variant. So what we like to send or what we like to emphasize would be ayaw po nating papasukin itong variant na ito. That's why we are doing all of these measures katulad po ng ginagawa natin ngayon. Ang mga areas or bansang may recorded cases na ng UK variant ay kasalukuyan na po nating minomonitor. Ang pagkumpirma ng community transmission sa mga lugar na ito ay ating tinakdang pamantayan upang ma-impose natin yung travel ban. As what has been explained a while ago, there are a lot of implications when you do restrictions or travel ban. Kaya pinag-aaralan po nating maigi ito. So sana po na ipaliwanag natin ng maayos ito at wala pong confusion dito and we can all have an aligned message. So let me just call on now Secretary Duque for his closing remarks. Sec?
Maraming salamat, Yusek Vergere. At muli sa ating pong mga eksperto, maraming salamat po sa inyong panahon. At sa ating pong pagtatapos, nais ko lang pong ibahagi ang dalawang importanteng mensahe. Nasabi na po ito ng ating pong mga bisita at ngunit tingin ko maganda rin na bigyan diin itong mga mensaheng ito. Una, sa paglitaw ng new variant na ito, mas dapat natin paigtingin ang pagsunod sa atin minimum public health standards at napaka-importante po nitong MPHS, yung frequent washing of the hands, cough etiquette, yung paggamit ng tamang paggamit ng mask, face shield, pagdistansya ng isang metro o higit pa, at paninigurado na maayos ang ventilasyon o sirkulasyon ng hangin sa pagprotekta laban sa COVID. No? Hindi lamang po tayo mapoprotektahan ng MPHS sa kasalukuyang variant, bagkus ang MPHS po ay kinikilalang epektibo sa kahit anong mutation o variant ng virus na ito. Para maiwasan ang pag-mutate ng virus, kinakailangan natin mapanatiling mababa ang kaso sa bansa. Kung mas kaunti ang mga taong na-infect, mas mababa rin ang tsansa na mag-mutate ang virus. At ikalawa, kailangan natin patuloy na pagtibayin ang kumpiyansa ng publiko sa bakuna. Dahil sa paglabas ng bagong variant, may nagiging inclusive at equitable ang vaccine efforts sa buong mundo. Kaya naman dapat natin sabayan ito ng increased vaccine confidence. Kailangan natin maging transparent sa ating mga efforts to secure our vaccines at kailangan natin magbigay ng regular na updates para maiparating sa ating pong publiko na atin talagang sinisigurado na ang bakuna na pipiliin ay ligtas at epektibo. At ito po ay gawin natin gamit ang nagkakaisang boses ng gobyerno. At kayo po, aming mga media partners, ay ang aming katuwang dito. So muli, sa ngalan ng Department of Health at ang Interagency Task Force, ako po ay malugod na nagpapaalam muli at sa susunod na pagkakataon po ay makapagpulong tayo sa susunod na media forum at kung anuman po ang mga bagong impormasyon o kaalaman na makakalap namin, amin pong ibabahagi ito at bibigyan linaw sa lahat ng pagkakataon. Thank you. Back to you.
Laura.
Thank you, sir. So maraming salamat po. We thank everyone for being in the call and we request your cooperation din po in underscoring the messages given by the Secretary of Health and the pool of experts present with us today. Thank you so much and happy and blessed Sunday.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.